Pokemon Discord version. Arc 3, The Phantom Sun, Eerie Acres. As Aiden and Evie walked past the sharpened black brush and rotten vegetation, they entered into an almost pitch-black darkness. The only visibility available to them consisted of only 5 feet in front of their eyes, though that was even blurred by the immense darkness. As Aiden walked, he could make out many pairs of glowing eyes and mouths in the distance, as well as the wailing, sobbing, and disembodied moans from lingering ghosts of the past. Looking up made it seem like the trees and brush had somehow grown together and formed a sort of ceiling for the forest. No! A sound abruptly cut through the mesh of whispers and groaning, breaking the dreary silence. What was that? Aiden said out loud. Suddenly a large hypno appeared out of thin air before Aiden. Yeah! Aiden yelled out in fear as he raised his arms, trying to shield himself from the unsettling creature. No, the hypno said as it then disappeared just as quickly as it appeared before. Aiden then walked more slowly and cautiously, as he did not want any more surprise encounters. The manic whispers and desperate violent screams of ghostly entities filled the air along with the smell of carcass and rotting flesh. He looked around and tried to make out any objects or figures in the dark. However, to no avail, nothing could be clearly seen. Evie cowered on Aiden's shoulder as Aiden petted its head gently, trying to comfort it as much as possible, but the truth was, Aiden was just as terrified and uncertain as Evie was. Don't worry, Evie. We're gonna make it through this safe and sound. That's a promise, Aiden said to his petrified partner. I've got an idea. I'll make us a torch, he said with confidence. Aiden walked towards the edge of the thin, winding trail and felt around for a tree with branches he could break and bundle together to make his torch. Here's a perfect one, he said as he reaches for a brittle branch on one of the thousands of menacing-looking trees that seem as if they were weeping eternally. Snap! He broke the branch and severed it from the tree. Huh? Aiden suddenly realizes that the tree he just snapped a branch off of was no tree at all. To his own horror, the tree was alive and snarling viciously as it uprooted itself and began to chase Aiden. As the tree moved, Aiden noticed a dead body hung from a branch, looking as if the person had committed suicide out of desperation of losing their way in this hellish forest. He didn't get a good look at the body, but from what he saw, it looked as if it was half rotten and had been hanging there for a long time. Ah! Aiden sprinted as fast as he could through the pure darkness, cradling Evie in his arms, protecting him as he bolted blindly through the forest with adrenaline coursing through him wildly. As he's running, he notices most of the vegetation he passes also begins coming to life and chasing him as if he disturbed their slumber. Aiden looks back just to peek at the horrors unfolding behind him and notices all of his enemies are Pokemon. Sudowoodo, Carnivine, Yamask, Haunter, Trevenant, Phantump, and many more were chasing him like a horde of the undead, not showing any signs of stopping. He ran until his heart felt like it was going to fly out of his chest from beating at such a rapid pace. Meanwhile, Evie is so afraid it can't even open its eyes as Aiden carries it in his arms. He can feel the ground trembling beneath him with the heavy stampede of steps behind him on the forest floor as they got closer. Finally, as Aiden manages to get some distance between him and the horde, he sees a narrow passage off of the main trail. That's it! If we can make it there, we can hide out for a while, and maybe find an alternate route out of this freaky place, he says to Evie, out of breath and panting. He picks up to full speed. He needs to get as much distance as possible between him and them if this is going to work. Here we go! He makes it to the cut and throws himself into the brush of the narrow passage. The brush is rough and prickly, resulting in Aiden and Evie getting cut up pretty bad from the impact. However, The horde runs by, ignorant to their location, and continues barreling down the forest's main path in hopes of finding Aiden. We did it, buddy, Aiden says to Evie, completely exhausted. Evie is laying in the dirt, out of breath as well, and damaged from the briars pretty badly. Oh no! Are you okay, boy? Aiden says, concerned about his partner's injuries. He examines Evie and pulls out one of the potions Nurse Joy gave him, and some bandages. There you go, bud. This will fix you right up. He cleans Evie up and picks him back up, cradling it in his arms again. I'm so sorry, Evie. I promised you I would never let you get hurt, and I failed you already. I'm so sorry, my friend. Can you ever forgive me? Evie. Evie replies weakly as he leans up to Aiden's cheek and licks it gently before falling back into his arms. Thanks, buddy. I'm so lucky to have a friend like you. Aiden then lays down his tarp and places Evie gently down on it to rest while he tends to his own wounds. Tends to wounds. Healing. Ah, there we go. Good as new. Alright, Evie, are you ready to keep going? Aiden says. Evie nods and walks off of the tarp. Aiden packs the tarp up and everything else they had just used and presses on down the narrow passage. As they walk, Aiden hears a voice crying up ahead, and this voice was different from the disembodied voices that carried throughout the forest constantly. This voice sounded real, like a human girl was sobbing in the distance. Aiden was afraid, but he knew that there was no turning back, and they had no choice but to follow the crying voice. It seemed to him that the closer he got to the voice, the more he could hear only the crying and nothing else. Everything else was completely still and silent. Hello? Aiden said reluctantly, in attempts to call out to the voice. The voice offered no response. It only continued to weep and sob eerily. Aiden shivered as a dense cold swept over him and ran chills down his spine. As they walked forward, the sobbing grew more violent and seemingly uncontrollable. Aiden could now make out a figure sitting knees up and facing the opposite direction of Aiden. It was a young girl. She couldn't be any older than Aiden was. Her skin as pale as snow and her hair as black as coal. She sat there with her face buried in her arms and knees, crying hysterically. As Aiden and Evie got closer, the crying got more hysterical. Hey, are you okay? Aiden said, still as reluctant as ever. She was now screaming at the top of her lungs with a piercing screech as she cried and shook violently. Aiden now felt colder than ever, as if he were shirtless and soaking wet in a snowstorm. The wind began to pick up and blow the brush and trees, whipping everything around relentlessly. Hey, stop crying! It'll be okay! Aiden yelled through the storming wind and the screaming little girl. The girl stopped crying and stood up, slowly turning towards Aiden while the wind whipped and slashed everything around them. The girl looked into Aiden's eyes and let out the most vicious scream he had ever heard from any living creature in his entire lifetime. Her face, as it revealed itself, looked mutilated with flesh ripped and torn from itself. Aiden and Evie covered their ears as the girl disappeared in a flash. The wind stopped. The crying stopped. Aiden opened his eyes and uncovered his ears, and the girl was gone. He no longer felt freezing cold. Then the disembodied voices and whispers came back. I don't even understand how so much horror can exist in one place, especially a place so close to home. Huh? I smell something. I think it's smoke! Aiden looks forward and he could see thick smoke that now blanketed the already impossibly thick darkness. Let's follow it, boy. Maybe that's our way out, he said to Evie with excitement. They began to run through the smoke, trying to hold their breath as long as possible, but the smoke wouldn't let up. In the distance, they could hear the screaming of that little girl again. "Is that her again?" Aiden asked, as they continued to run through the smoke desperately, trying to find a way out of the hell in which they had. They ran as fast as they could, as they were finally making out shapes through the smoke. "Hey, I see a house!" Aiden yelled to Evie. Through the smoke, there was a tiny cottage that looked like no one had lived in it since long, long ago. "We're almost there! Keep going, Evie!" As they made it out of the smoke, before them was the cottage they saw. However, what they didn't expect was for it to be on fire, burning rapidly. Within that, they could hear the unmistakable cries for help and painful screams of those who got caught up in the flames. Screaming and crying. It sounded like children trapped inside of the burning home, though Aiden was unsure if the flames had gotten to them yet, by the sounds of the screams. "We have to help them, boy!" Aiden quickly ran up to the front door and tried to push it open. He could hear banging on the other side of desperate victims trying to escape. The door wouldn't budge no matter what. Aiden did to try and open it. "Hold on! I'm gonna get you out! Back away from the door!" Aiden had an idea hatch into his mind. He reached for his bag and bundled up some of his gunpowder explosives and attached them to some fishing line. Then he tied the bomb to 3 different throwing daggers. His plan was to blow the door open with enough firepower to at least loosen it if he couldn't successfully breach the cabin. "Okay, here I go! Everyone, back away from the door! I'm going to blow it open and let you guys out! Please stand clear of the door!" Aiden tried to warn everyone banging on the door to back away, but they continued to bang on the door and scream in pain and agony as if they couldn't hear him at all. "Please back away! I don't want to hurt any of you! Please! I'm trying to save you!" Aiden pleaded for them to back away, but quickly realized he had no choice. He needed to blow this thing open now, or these people were all goners. "All right, I'm doing it now!" Winding back, he launched the 3 daggers and beamed them directly into the middle of the doors. He watches as the flames ignite the explosive. Boom! A wicked explosion instantly crumbles the door, reducing it to nothing but ash and debris. Likely the rush of sudden oxygen caused the explosion to magnify. Aiden runs into the burning building without hesitation and bursts into the doorway, effortlessly pushing past the flame. He could hear the screams of the victims as the smell of burning, melting flesh creeps into his nostrils. Sudden change. Subtle rush of wind. What's going on?" Aiden says calmly in the extreme confusion. It seems the cabin he had just entered was not on fire, nor could he hear the screaming anymore. Even the smell of burning flesh only slightly lingered. I don't understand. How is this even possible? I know this place was on fire. I know it for sure. And the screaming, the victims, it all seemed so real." Aiden looked around the cabin. It was burned to the point where over half of it was exposed to the outside. Everything inside was either charred and black or simply just ash. There was no sign of life whatsoever, only sorrow. There was, however, a wooden eating table and 2 seats that looked like they were used recently. There was also a horizontal slow roast pole over a fire pit with rocks surrounding it on all sides, as well as blood stains everywhere with charred pieces of bone within the ash. At this point, Aiden was beyond confused. He felt more psychologically tormented. He didn't know what to believe anymore. What was in front of his face, or what was in his mind? "Evie, you saw that too, didn't you, boy? You saw the fire, and you heard the screams?" Evie looked at Aiden confused and distracted with fear. Maybe I'm just letting this place mess with my head. We shouldn't get sidetracked from our mission. Let's find a way out of these woods once and for all, buddy." Evie liked the sound of that. It climbed up onto Aiden's shoulder again as they pressed onward, walking out of the cabin ruins. Thud! Ow! Aiden tripped on his way out and landed on his face. Evie expressed worry for his partner and his mental state. Aiden got up onto his feet and cleaned himself off as Evie jumped back up onto his shoulder. Whoosh! Huh? Suddenly, the little girl from earlier appears in an instant. Everything freezes as Aiden feels the cold creeping up his spine just like before. She stares into his eyes with hers glowing a raw, dead yellow and lets out a wickedly horrendous screech as her jaw unhinged like a snake's would. Aiden and Evie, face to face with this banshee of a spirit, feel the full intensity of her screeching. It clawed at their eardrums and scratched through their minds disgustingly. As it carries on, Aiden is frozen in place as she places her pale, veiny hand on his forehead, covering his eyes completely. Flash! Aiden is being shown a vision of what happened to the little girl. Round him up, girl! We're gonna eat whale tonight. Stab, stab, said Zato the cannibal to his brother Vero. Stab.
No, please, let us go,
said Dahlia, the lost war orphan.
Ah, Dahlia, help!
Yelled Dahlia's kid brother Navi. Quit struggling, boy. Accept your fate. Stab. Think about it like this. Pokemon eat each other in the wild. It's called the circle of life, son. Survival of the fittest. You and your little friend here just found yourselves on the wrong end of the food chain. Stab. Stab. Said Vero the cannibal. Looks like y'all were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The despicable cannibals capture the brother and sister. They then kill them slowly for their own sick pleasure. While stabbing into them violently, they cut off pieces of the children and force them to watch while they eat the small, raw pieces they cut. Then they proceed to cook their remains and eat it all, leaving nothing but bone, teeth, and fingernails. Now that was a good meal, said Zato. You're damn right, Zato. Now, let's make sure everything's under wraps here. Leave all the inedible sick children in the bedrooms. Bar this place up and let's burn it to the ground, said Vero.
No, those thugs from earlier. They were the ones who did this. This should have never happened. I'm so sorry they did this to you,
Aiden says. As he came out of the vision, the girl continued to wail and scream. The wind continues twisting around the scene violently, though now Aiden reaches his arms out to the wailing spirit before him and embraces her calmly with confidence in his actions. Slowly, the screaming tones down to a calm hum, then to silence.
You're safe now,
Aiden says, holding the spirit close to him.
Leave it to me. You can rest now.
The girl fades into black and materializes into her normal, calm-looking self, and then fades into the light, joining her brother on the other side. Aiden drops to his knees and begins to tear up as he stares blankly.
I will never let anything happen like this ever again. Dahlia, Navi, I'm so sorry.
Wind blows faintly. Aiden looks up and gets onto his feet.
Let's do this, Evie. We need to get a move on if we ever want to get strong enough to protect anyone.
Evie nods in agreement and follows his partner's lead. Aiden's path is clearer now, and his mind is now in a much better place. Evie begins trying to get Aiden's attention, letting him know that it senses something.
Evie! Evie!
It yelled repeatedly, pointing Aiden in the direction of a sleeping Zubat that was hanging upside down off of a tree branch with its wings folded over itself like a blanket.
All right, good eye, Evie. Time to make our first catch.
Aiden and Evie sneak up to the sleeping Pokemon, trying not to wake it, as to have the advantage.
Now, Evie, quick attack!
Aiden yelled as Evie sprung into action, running up and kicking off the two trees in order to reach the Zubat.
Evie!
Evie made contact with the Zubat, knocking it down to the ground.
Great job, boy. Now one more time.
Eevee launches another quick attack at the falling Zubat and misses. Zubat dodges the Eevee in midair and counterattacks with Supersonic.
Get out of the way, boy.
Aiden tries to warn Eevee, but it gets caught in the attack.
Eevee!
The Eevee tries to regain its vision and equilibrium, but crashes into a tree and hurts itself in confusion. Zubat then uses Leech Light, but misses Eevee as it snaps out of confusion.
Alright, it's not over yet. Use Swift Attack.
Aiden says to Eevee. It then launches a barrage of energy shaped like throwing stars at the target and makes perfect contact, for this attack cannot miss.
That's the way to do it. Nice one, boy. Now let's finish this.
Aiden yells as he throws one of his Pokeballs at the weakened Zubat. Zubat goes into the Pokeball but struggles every inch of the way in a tug of war. The ball shakes once.
Come on.
Then again.
Almost there.
Then it shakes once more and locks. Aiden caught Zubat.
Yeah! I caught Zubat!
Aiden jumps up and down with intense excitement and celebration of his new teammate.
The road ahead will be rough, but I promise you that we will work together and create an unbreakable bond over time, and I'll keep you safe every moment you stand by my side.
Aiden says to Zubat as he heals it with another one of his potions from his bag. They continue on down the narrow pathway, this time with a confident stride and a purpose in their steps. As they continue along, the voices of the spirits begin to dwindle and the darkness begins to fade. Aiden sees a light at the end of the crooked pathway. They have been walking for a while now.
There it is! We did it, Eevee! We found an exit!
They start to jog towards the light and notice someone is waiting for them. A figure leaning up against a tree with his arms crossed, his eyes closed and his head down.
Took you long enough, kid.
The eerie young man said, standing there as mysteriously smug as ever.
It's you again,
Aiden says to him.
Don't talk, just listen. We don't have much time before that angry mob of Pokemon catches up with you.
The eerie young man said with haste.
Beyond this exit is a barrier set up by Team Rocket that wraps around the entire perimeter of the forest of Hollow Town. Beyond that is a campsite with 5 Team Rocket grunts patrolling the forest's opening. You won't be able to handle them all at once in a head-on combat, so you're just going to have to figure something else out, because I'm not here to hold your hand and fight all your battles for you, kid.
Aiden gulps in fear, thinking this might be the end for him.
Isn't there any other way? What if Eevee and I start digging a hole? Then we could...
The eerie young man cuts off Aiden abruptly and says,
Didn't you hear anything I just said? Those Pokemon you pissed off back there are actively looking for you, and it seems like they're ready to tear you apart. You really think you have enough time to dig a hole underneath this barrier that's probably buried 20 feet underground? Use your head, kid.
The eerie young man begins to walk away into darkness of the forest slowly.
Wait, you said if I make it through, you would tell me your name.
Aiden yells out to the man.
You're not out of the woods yet, kid. I won't bother entertaining any dead man walking. Keep your head down and stay alive. If you can manage like you have so far, I'll tell you my name for sure, kid.
He replied as his voice trails off and he disappears into darkness.
Okay, time to make a plan, I suppose.
Aiden wonders to himself.
Let's see. Maybe I can make some explosive blades and get a good visual on them from up in a tree and take them all out one by one from the shadows.
Eevee looks at Aiden, excited as ever, wagging its tail.
Alright, you like that plan, boy? Yeah, let's do it then.
Aiden says to Eevee as he grabs his bag and begins to craft his explosive blades. Craft.
Perfect. I've got 6 boom blades ready to go. Now to climb up high and get a good visual on my targets.
He looks around for a tree high enough to see over the wall.
There.
He points to a tall, thick tree that was wide and had many climbable branches. They rush over to it and begin climbing upward.
Keep going, Eevee. We're almost over the top.
Aiden says out loud. They climbed to the point where they could see clear over the wall and had a clean visual on the campsite.
Okay, stop here.
Aiden says quietly to Evie. I can see them perfectly. As Aiden poked his head over the wall, he could see a campfire and 3 out of the 5 rocket grunts. He made sure to keep himself hidden well behind the thick tree branch and the wall. This is perfect. They'll never expect anyone to be up here. I can see 2 men and a lady. But that scary guy said there were 5 of them. Aiden's thoughts. 2 of them must be somewhere else. I even have them separated. This was a perfect plan. The 3 rocket grunts in sight were all around the campfire with their guards completely down. One of them was sleeping, and the other 2 were having a deep conversation and appeared to be smoking drugs of some kind, passing the smoke between them occasionally. Aiden made no mistake in his plan, and watched their every move for about 15 minutes or so, just to make sure he didn't alert them in any way, or that the other 2 didn't immediately come back and join the other ones in sight. He listened in on their conversation, but it had nothing relevant or useful to Aiden. They only rambled on about how in the future people are going to discover an island with an abundance of currently existing but alternate form Pokemon, and how those Pokemon will look insurmountably more ridiculous than their original forms. Aiden wondered back to himself of a tale that Master Eldritch told him of an existing island just like the one they spoke of. Aiden's thoughts. I guess they weren't really far off. Impressive for a couple of Team Rocket dummies. But that was neither here nor there. Aiden decided it was time to put the 2 grunts out of their misery. He knew he needed a distraction to try and lure them a little closer so he wouldn't miss, considering he was still a good distance away from them. Aiden reaches for a flimsy tree branch near him and breaks it off from its base. He wraps the tree branch with the dead leaves from off of the tree he was on, and ties it all together with his fishing line, wrapping up a nice surprise explosive bundle hidden in the leaves. After that, he ties the other end of the fishing line around the tree he stood on. He then ties his dagger to the branch, making it into a spear which gives it proper weight and aerodynamics, then ignites the dead leaves on the opposite end and spears the branch into the ground not too far from where he was. Now that the trap was set, the fishing line went from Aiden's current location to where he threw the spear.
Huh? Whoa, man. What was that?
Said the female rocket grunt to the male rocket grunt. I don't know. It looks like a fire. Let's go check it out. He replies to her. Yes, Aiden says to himself. As they make their way over to the burning branch, they are hesitant and frightened. The male walks closer but stays back as they carefully examine the burning branch that was sticking up out of the ground. Well, go check it out, the female says. What? Why me? You go check it out, he cowardly says back. You are such a wimp. Just go check it out, you dork, she says. Fine. He starts inching towards the flame, and as he gets closer, he reaches out to grab it. A little closer, Aiden says to himself as he stalks the grunts. The grunt grabs the stick and pulls it from the ground with a forced yank. He holds it in his hand and notices a blade tied to it. Suddenly he feels a tug. Bingo! Aiden says out loud as he pulls the fishing line hard enough to sever it from the branch and tie up the fiery bundle tight enough to move the flames closer to the hidden explosive, exposing its tiny wick to the fire. Shit! Explosion. Boom! With a detonating bang, the branch explodes in the male grunt's hand and blows his arm clean off, sending him into immediate shock. As he lies there twitching in the dirt, he is slowly bleeding out and will surely die soon. The female grunt lets out a blood-curdling scream as she falls backwards looking at her friend's face, half roasted with his hair and eyes still firmly ablaze. Aiden took this opportunity to take down the second target, for he knew her screams had to have alerted the other grunts. To his surprise, the sleeping grunt by the campfire remained asleep. Here's one for you too! Aiden yells as he lobs an explosive dagger directly into the grunt's forehead, effectively silencing her. Seconds after, the blade stabs into her head, the explosive ignites and her head splits down the middle and pops into chunks of gray matter and bloody fragments of skull. I'm sorry you had to see that, boy, Aiden says to Evie. Evie was frightened by the ordeal, but seemed to understand the situation fully.
What do you know? The kid's a natural.
The eerie young man said to himself as he watched from the darkness. Aiden's main concern now was the two missing grunts. He decided to leave the sleeping one alone since he slept through two explosions that happened only feet away from him. Guys! What happened over there? In the distance, Aiden hears a voice yelling over at the campsite. Guys! What was that? They yell again as the voices get rapidly closer. Aiden quickly returned Eevee to its Pokeball and tried to hide, but it was too late. They had made it to the campsite and immediately spotted the two bodies of their former comrades and Aiden standing next to them. What the hell? What are you doing, kid? Who the hell do you think you are? Another male rocket grunt with yet another female grunt. That explains why they were gone for so long. Neither of them looked any older than 18 years old. Aiden stood there frozen as they quickly made their way closer to him. Answer me, damn it! Did you do this? How did this happen? The male grunt said to Aiden again, this time grabbing Aiden by his shirt collar and lifting him. If you won't tell me what happened, I'm just gonna have to assume you did this to our friends. You wouldn't want me thinking that you did this, would you? I guess we're just gonna have to... Whoosh! Slice! Suddenly, something flew by the female rocket grunt at such lightning speed it was almost invisible to the naked eye. The male grunt lets go of Aiden, then all of a sudden the female grunt begins gurgling and appears to have blood leaking from her mouth and nose. Kaya? What's wrong? Kaya! The male grunt says to her as her head begins to separate from her mouth. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. Her head was severed as it fell to the ground with a sickening thud, exposing her bottom jaw with her tongue flopping uncontrollably over her bottom row of teeth. Blood splatter and brain fluids drenched the dirt below her body that fell limp after taking two wobbly steps towards the male grunt. The male grunt stares with his eyes wide as his face is painted with her blood. Ah! The male grunt begins to scream, but is quickly silenced as a sinister hand reaches into the back of his neck and rips his tongue out along with his spinal cord. Aiden falls backwards as he witnesses these horrific fatalities. The rocket grunt's head goes back, bending unnaturally into a contorted pose, like a body without a spine would. The body takes a couple of slow steps forward and then collapses into the dirt. Behind the corpse stood the eerie young man, with the grunt's spine and tongue still firmly grasped in his hand.
Looks like you made it to the other side, kid. You did good,
he said to Aiden with a wicked half-grin, looking intensely at Aiden. Aiden gets up off of the ground and says, Do you always have to be so terrifyingly brutal? The eerie young man scoffs at Aiden. Scoff.
You're one to talk,
he replies as he uses the spine to point to the corpses of Aiden's victims.
Explosive projectiles aren't really my style, but they most certainly get the job done. Way to think on your feet, kid. However, you froze up there towards the end when the last two targets spotted you. That kind of rookie mistake can cost you your life if you aren't careful. Nonetheless, you and your Eon spirit are still alive and well. You did good.
Aiden was glad he made it out alive, but he didn't feel good about what he had to do to make it here. Now that I've made it out, I want some answers. Who are you and why are you helping me? Why haven't you just killed me like you've murdered everyone else we've encountered together? How did you know those Pokemon were chasing me back in the forest? How do you move so fast? Where did you get that sword and shield you carry? Oh, and what's with your cloak? Are you on fire or something? This is the first time Aiden felt someone level-headed speaking to this man, so he took the opportunity to onslaught his many questions.
Look, kid, I understand you have questions. We all do. Though, most questions people ask before they have the chance to really think about if they really want to know the answers. Most questions reveal their own answers as time passes, but others remain only a mystery and nothing more. Those are the questions that people regret finding the answers to, once found.
The eerie young man stared blankly in silence as Aiden stared back in confusion. So, that's it? That pretty much tells me nothing, said Aiden with a disappointed look on his face.
Maybe I gave you too much credit earlier.
the eerie young man says sarcastically. Come on, would you at least tell me your name like you said you would? Aiden said, pestering the young man further.
Oh, that's right. I owe you that much, don't I?
He replied.
You can call me Anzu.
Aiden's face suddenly shined a huge smile. Anzu, so that's your name, huh? He said, looking at him with anticipation.
Kid, why are you staring at me like that?
Anzu asks. Well? Aiden says, expecting something from Anzu.
Well, what, kid?
He replies this time more annoyed. Well, aren't you going to ask for my name? Aiden says with extreme excitement. Anzu walks up to Aiden slowly with a menacing look on his face. Huh? Aiden feels cold now and begins to shiver. He is frozen in place. Anzu reaches out his hand and places it gently on the top of Aiden's head playfully.
I already know who you are. Aiden Monarch.
Anzu says to him, breaking the cold tension. What? How? How do you know me? I've never seen you once in my entire life, huh? Just like that, Anzu disappeared into thin air as his voice carried over.
Worry about what's important, kid. Beyond this campsite, there's quite a stretch of land before you. Make it to the Wyvern Pass. You've been through a lot. You should find a secluded place to set up camp for the night and rest until morning. See you then, kid.
Suddenly his voice dissipated, and Aiden felt like dinner and sleep was a fantastic idea for Evie and himself. So he then found a nice spot a couple of miles away from the rocket campsite.